The Stratford Library Association owes a debt of gratitude to the Reverend Beverly E. Warner, who during his brief tenure at Christ Church was very vocal about the need for a library and reading room in town. Public response to his enthusiasm resulted in a meeting at the church rectory on January 12, 1885. It was at this meeting that the Stratford Library Association was established. The library and reading rooms were set up with a collection of 1,100 books in Watson Smith's pharmacy. By the end of 1885, another 316 volumes had been purchased, necessitating a move to a building owned by probate judge Robert H. Russell. The Lovell Building currently stands at this Main Street location. The library collection grew quickly, and in 1890, the leaders determined that there was a need to build a permanent library facility. This was still an era of subscription libraries, and public funding was not expected for the construction project. Letters soliciting funds were written and sent to Stratford families, as well as the descendants of the founding families. One of these letters was delivered to Stratford native Birdsey Blakeman, president of the American Book Company in New York City. Mr. Blakeman was proud of his Stratford roots, being a descendant of one of the 17 original families to settle the town. In one generous move, Mr. Blakeman offered to pay for the construction of the library plus $5,000 to support the growing collection. His gift was accepted in 1892. While the library leaders had funding for a building and a growing list of subscribers, they still needed to complete the incorporation process. In 1894, the association submitted documents of incorporation which were approved by the Connecticut General Assembly in Hartford during the January 1895 session. This is when the Stratford Library Association, as we know it today, came into existence. Mr. Blakeman didn't sit idly waiting for the library to become incorporated. As soon as his gift was accepted, he enlisted the services of architect William H. Miller of Ithaca, New York. Miller had designed a number of library buildings, including the Southworth Library in Dryden, New York, and what is now the Uris Library at Cornell University. The next task was to find a suitable location for the new building. Mr. Blakeman took this to heart and found the perfect spot. He worked with the library leaders and agreed that the home of probate judge Robert H. Russell afforded a central location and a spacious property. It is not clear if Mr. Blakeman actually purchased Judge Russell's house, but apparently the judge wanted to keep his historic 1772 home. In the fall of 1893, the house was moved from its site using teams of horses and relocated to Elm Street, where it stands today. The first construction stakes for the new library building were driven in the fall of 1894 under the supervision of Mr. Blakeman. Sadly, he did not live to see the completion of his gift to Stratford, passing away just days later on September 30th, 1894. Mr. Miller's design for the Stratford Library featured Romanesque architecture using St. Lawrence marble, an entrance and tower on the north side, heavy oak doors featuring iron grills, north and south transepts, each featuring 2 marble pillars, a carved mantel fireplace on the east end of the building, and 2 additional fireplaces providing heat in the north transept and in the librarian's office. The roof is made of tile and copper gutters were installed. Originally, this space served as a reading room. The architect also commissioned the furnishings, including carved oak tables and chairs, and lamps with Spanish pottery bases with a green glaze. The unheated stack area located outside the door at the back of the room was designed to house 40,000 volumes on 3 stories of iron-framed Steichman stacks. The library still has some of these stacks in use in our storage area. The building extended as far back as the top of the ramp leading to the current library lobby. In fact, an exterior buttress of the original building can be seen inside the U-Create space. The Stratford Shakespeare connection wasn't lost on Mr. Miller, as his design featured this beautiful stained glass portrait of the bard. At the rear of the building, a second stained glass window was featured. This window was hidden from view after a 1955 addition to the library, but was rescued by Library Board member Joe Janusick during a 1980 construction project and was reinstalled in the children's department, greeting patrons as they approached the rear entrance. The original projected cost of the building was $25,000, but upon completion, Mr. Blakeman's widow added $5,000 to cover the full cost of the building, in addition to providing another $5,000 for collection purchases. This building was dedicated on January 16, 1896, with a collection of 4,000 volumes. The new library did not have electricity, and the 3 fireplaces were used for heat. Records indicate that electricity was introduced in 1908 and that a coal furnace would be the first source of centralized heat. On May 20th, 1896, the library opened for business. Patrons were greeted by Miss Frances Russell, who became known to generations as Miss Fanny. Miss Fanny dedicated her life to library services in Stratford. She was among the founding volunteers of the library in 1885 and was hired as the librarian in 1896. It was Miss Fanny who issued library cards and oversaw subscriptions. It was Miss Fanny who introduced patrons to new titles, shared books with young readers, and built the collection as the library entered the 20th century. Miss Fanny would hold the title of librarian for the Stratford Library Association until 1944, and she would remain active as librarian emeritus until 1958. That's 73 years of service. By the 1920s, library services had grown and changed. Libraries were more than just books, newspapers, and quiet spaces to read. Libraries were serving as community gathering spaces, and the demand for children's programs was growing. In Miss Fanny's 1928 annual report to the Library Board, the need to expand the library was put forth. In 1930, a fund was established to construct an addition to the library. But plans for library expansion were set aside during the Second World War. Miss Fanny, now advancing in age, retained the title of Librarian Emeritus, but in 1944 she turned over day-to-day responsibility for the library to her assistant, Mrs. Alice Lovell Sniffen. Mrs. Sniffen would serve as librarian until her passing in 1955. During these years of prosperity, the Library Board doubled its effort to raise funds to expand the library, and by 1950, there was $85,000 in the coffers to fund a project valued at $120,000. Library Board member Catherine Bonnell Mitchell spoke up at a board meeting, exclaiming, "We're only short $35,000? I move we proceed at once. The Lord will provide." Her motion was passed and her expectations were met well before the dedication of the 1955 edition. The town of Stratford provided the remaining funds for the project, and the beloved Miss Fanny, now 96 years old, was brought to the library by ambulance and with a police escort to participate in the cornerstone laying ceremony. The late 1950s brought a young family to town, and their son, Stephen, frequented the Stratford Library of that day. Stephen King spent his formative years strolling the streets, yards, and playgrounds of Stratford, occasionally visiting the library. Our library certainly made an impression on him as he based the library scenes in his 1977 horror novel, It, on the library of his youth. This is a unique claim of fame for our town and our library. The 1955 edition of the library housed additional space for books, a much-needed children's area, and a dedicated workspace for staff. As the library entered the 1960s, things were getting very crowded, even with the 1955 edition. The town of Stratford had purchased the former Grace Lutheran Church on the corner of North Main and Wakely Avenue. The building was empty as the town debated a use for the facility. In 1964, the town of Stratford leased the former Grace Lutheran Church to the Stratford Library Association for $1 a year. Endowment funds were used to convert the space into the North Branch Library, and the reading room was named the Catherine Bonnell Mitchell Reading Room. This branch featured a popular library for entertainment. Within a few years, a children's room was added, and both the original Stratford Library and new North Branch Library were bustling centers of activity. Through the 1960s and early 70s, Stratford continued to grow, as did the overhead cost for the operation of two separate library facilities. Library Director Edie Landis kept a shrewd eye to this development. She also kept a close eye on the library's next-door neighbor, the American Legion Sterling Memorial Building, an underutilized facility that was falling into disrepair. But Mrs. Landis and the library board seized the opportunity to utilize the beautiful building next door. As part of a municipal complex which included the construction of the Baldwin Senior Center, the town of Stratford collaborated with the Stratford Library Association to expand and consolidate library services. This project also sought to connect these services via a plaza and walkway to the Sterling House. In 1979, under the leadership of the Stratford Library Association's first female president, Vivian Knapp, architects Gallagher, Schoenhart, and Baer of Simsbury were selected to connect the two buildings and expand the Stratford Library by nearly 300%. In order to accomplish their vision, the 1955 addition was removed and replaced with a steel structure connecting the library and the American Legion Hall. The original library building was converted into the Lovell Room program space. Miss Fanny's original office was converted to storage space due to the fire safety requirements that converted the tower into a fire escape, and for the first time in its history, the library's signature tower was no longer open to the public. However, special care was taken to convert this space with an eye toward its history. The original stack area was converted to restrooms, and a ramp was installed for accessibility. Meanwhile, work on the Sterling Memorial Building called for the removal of the front and rear entrances. The administrative offices are now located where the front entrance once stood. The balcony was replaced with a single mezzanine, keeping the distinctive steel trusses in full view. Architect Ken Best was tasked with the design of a three-story building to join the 1896 library to the 1920s Legion Hall. He has stated that his biggest challenge with this project was the fact that the two buildings are not parallel to one another and that adjustments to the design were constantly being made to ensure clean connections through 10-inch thick stone walls. Depending on the direction you approach the library from, you get two completely different experiences. Parking in the lot and walking into the back entrance, you feel you are entering a modern facility, the only hint of its history in the stained glass window above the entrance. The older buildings barely visible at the periphery. If you park on Main Street and enter, you walk between the two older buildings. Their historic nature remains intact even as the modern entryway comes into view. In addition to a newly remodeled facility, the 1980s brought automation to the Stratford Library, replacing decades of handwritten, typed, and computer-generated catalog cards with a computerized library system. The 1990s brought public computing services, filling the large reading room in the former Sterling Memorial Building with a computer lab. The 21st century brought a shift to premium online services available via the internet for patrons to access 24/7. One of the newer features of the library are the stained glass windows located in the children's room. These beautiful windows were created by Stratford native Reverend Robert J. Taranteef, who made the stained glass artwork in celebration of the library's 100th anniversary. The large learning tree window depicts what can be accomplished through the joy, growth, mystery, and pleasure of discovery that comes through reading. The smaller windows on either side of the learning tree depict scenes of Stratford, including the library building itself. In the 19th century, our founders developed the library to provide opportunities to learn and grow through access to books and reading. The Stratford Library continues to be a center for learning, serving families who have been here for generations alongside our country's newest citizens. The library has also expanded its purpose to offer opportunities to explore avenues of creativity. As we settle into the 21st century, we continue to be a space for learning and creativity, but we now offer opportunities for individuals to connect and share their knowledge and experience. With expanded programs and services, we are once again bursting at the seams. But we will face our challenges with creativity and an eye to the future needs of the Stratford community.